Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Dracut Arts. With me today are co-host Tom McGarry and September Arts Event author Sonya Larson and ASL interpreter Shelley. Sonya Larson's short fiction and essays have appeared in such publications as The Best American Short Stories, Plowshares, American Short Fiction, American Literary Review Poets and Writers, Writers Chronicle, Amazon Originals, West Branch, Salamander, The Harvard Advocate, and The Hub. She has received fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts 2020, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the Vermont Studio Center, Ragdale, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the St. Batoff Club Foundation, and others. She is director of Grub Street Muse and the Marketplace Writing Conference, and is an organizer of the Boston Writers of Color Group. She received her MFA in fiction from the Program for Writers at Warren Wilson College, and she lives in Somerville, Massachusetts. Sonya is currently looking to interview park rangers of color and other nature enthusiasts and scientists for her upcoming book. Sonya, I would love to hear a little bit about that project.
Mm.
Sure, yes. Well, several years ago, my twin brother and I were hiking in Glacier National Park in Montana. And um, to make a long story short, we almost died.
Gosh, what happened?
Oh boy. Okay. If you have time, I'll extend it a little, tell the story a little longer. Um, we were hiking along and we got caught in a very unexpected storm. The temperature dropped 40 degrees. It was snowing and icy rain. We were hiking for 7 hours and we were trying to get off this mountain. The sun was setting. We were woefully unprepared. We were wearing shorts, t-shirts, and there was
Oh, wow.
dumping freezing rain on us. And it was really, really scary. Um, and I should say on the entire time we were on the trail, we didn't see anyone save for one couple who had stopped midway on the trail to get engaged. And yeah, it was really sweet. We stopped, we talked to them, we congratulated them, and because they were stopping and taking photos, we passed them on the trail while they stayed behind and savored the moment. But then I should say, then that's when the storm hit, and it was really terrifying. And without getting into too many details, it was very touch and go for us. And we finally did make it back off the mountain in just before sunset, which was our goal. But what as soon as we kind of got off our wet clothes and reckoned with the fact that we weren't going to be stranded on this mountain in freezing temperatures at night, uh, our second thought was, what about that couple? Where's that couple? We know we passed them. We barely got off this mountain. How are they doing? So we run to the park ranger station and we knock on the door in the pouring rain, and this park ranger opens the door, and we tell him the whole story. We said, we're worried about this couple, we're worried. And he just listened to us, and he looked at us and nodded his head, and we said, what are you going to do? Aren't you going to do something? Are you going to go search for this couple? And he blinked at us and he said, nope. And we said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm going to write it in my log. And we were astonished. And we said, how can you not go out and search for them? And he said, this is why we post signs everywhere telling you to be prepared for any inclement weather or anything that could happen. This is why we warn you about going on these trails if you haven't brought all the proper equipment, et cetera, et cetera. He says all day long, we try to tell you people to be prepared. And if you're not prepared or you make dumb choices, you can end up in these situations. This is the wilderness. Like, this can happen. And if it's dangerous for this couple, it's dangerous for me, it's dangerous for my fellow rangers. I'm not going to send them up there. And he was kind of surly and whatever, but he just laid it out straight for us, and I was shocked. And my brother and I like went to a local bar and drank a beer and were like processing our like scared feelings. I should say we did see the couple the next day. They came back safely somehow, but leaving Glacier National Park after that trip really got me thinking a lot about my own assumed safety net. when I was
Sure.
on,
Yeah.
yeah, when I was on that trail. I just assumed that, for lack of a better term, the national park system wouldn't let me be on this trail under these conditions if it truly was that dangerous for me, or which is to say America wouldn't let me be on this trail if it truly was dangerous for me. And that was a incredible assumption on my part. It was incredibly false, and it endangered me and my brother. And so that dovetailed with the stuff I was already thinking about race in America, and it was already getting me thinking about the assumed safety that I have in my racial experience, or that other people may have, or the lack thereof. And I really wanted to kind of like tackle these two ideas in the space of a novel about safety, like the assumed safety you might have in the wilderness, assumed safety you might have racially, and how they dovetail. I'm still figuring that out,
Huh,
but
that's really interesting because I've never really thought of them as dovetailing together
Mhm,
because as an I grew up as a Girl Scout on my honor. And I learned the responsibility, really,
mhm,
which is what the park ranger was telling you, that I was personally responsible to make sure I had the right equipment, that I was in shape, that
mhm,
people knew where I was going, that I had an escape plan, a backup plan, all the right equipment for me, and actually I homeschooled my kids and they were raised the same way. But
mhm,
I know
mhm.
a lot of people aren't like that because
Wow.
I've taken wilderness first aid, and one of the things they do is they educate you about how dumb you can be or other people can be. And even as you get um, sick, right, or as you go into hyperthermia, you get dumb,
Mhm,
right? Or if you get a concussion, you get dumb.
mhm,
So it really does put you a lot in danger if you're not with a buddy, if someone doesn't know where you are and can't find you. It
mhm.
happens a lot.
It happens a lot. I mean, something like 286 people have died in Glacier National Park alone over the last 100 years. There's this
Actually,
stat.
over the last 100 years, that's not that many people considering.
That's true. That's true. It could be far more.
When you
Um,
think of how many people get shot in a big city, it's like there's no comparison here. Right?
true. This is true. But what's amazing is that a large there's books you can read solely just catalog all the ways that people unfortunately die in national parks each year. And what's really awful to comprehend, especially me, who was far less prepared than you, far less intelligent, so naive about my own naivete. Um,
Right, you don't know what you don't know. I
you
mean,
don't know what you don't know. So many of those deaths are totally preventable, by just different levels of preparedness, different judgment calls, simple things, very simple things. There are people who try to hike the Grand Canyon every year in stilettos, or they bring like a 16-ounce bottle of water, and and they think like this will be fine, and oftentimes the reason they think that that'll be fine is because of essentially the same logic that I was making, which was, if I really get in trouble, someone will be there to help me. A park ranger will help me, someone will helicopter my body out, whatever. But what I was shocking for me to realize is, no, this park ranger was flat out telling us, I will not be there for you, and you shouldn't count on us being there for you. And that is not that was a redefinition for me, not only of um me in relation to this park, but also like me in relation to nature generally, me in relation to my fellow man, like me in relation to myself. It
yeah,
really stuck with me. And I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of people think they're really good at being prepared. I thought I was good at being prepared, Diane. But like, was I prepared for a sudden
yeah,
storm? Absolutely not.
yeah.
And you really do have to be prepared for anything. So I just think it's really meaty material for art, and also with a novel, it's good to put a novel in a location where you simply just want to be for 300-400 pages. And I would love to just be in Glacier National Park in this novel. So I'm still exploring it. I still have, a ways to go, but I know that I find the material really interesting. in part because it sparks conversations just like the ones we're having right now, Diane, and I hope that someday when I finish it, it will be a place where people can meet to discuss these same ideas too, because
Sure.
they're they're they can get thorny. So so yes.
They can. And here I want to put up your call for park rangers of color and um, what exactly you're looking for. I have to plug park rangers though. It's not that they're not going to save you. They actually take care to make sure the trails are good. You know about the animals that are there. They take care of animal management. We don't have enough park rangers actually, and
Well, and
it
that is so true. They're vastly underpaid, vastly under-resourced. They work really hard. And so, yes, I don't want to say like park rangers aren't there to help you. They are,
But yes,
but
they are. But I mean, they also have drug trafficking in the national parks now too. I mean, there's so many issues with national parks. But yeah, they need us to be socially responsible, right? They keep the campgrounds safe, and you know they'll warn you about stuff. But it's really asking somebody else to risk their life for you in some situations, and that's not a fair thing to do. It's yeah, it's like going to war sometimes when people are stuck. It's anyway. Thank you. That was very interesting.
I'm having fun already.
Well, the other thing, that what there were a few things that struck me, and when I was looking at your material, besides the straight up stories, and one of them, I have to say, brought wound up bringing up um, the dress, and you said you wanted to talk about race because of the dress, and I had. Honestly, I had to go back and say, what is she talking about with the dress? And then I found, of course, this ad the Salvation put on with the dress, targeting violence against women. And their whole thing was, why is it so hard to see black and blue? Which I think this is a phenomenal ad for domestic violence awareness, but they got really dished for it. Um, but also, you know, can you talk a little bit about how we see the colors differently? Because it's a whole brain thing that I wasn't even aware of.
Yes, yes. I am not no expert in visual neuroscience. So it would be best to refer to the wonderful articles that came out at the time about the dress to understand the scientific element of that. But for just to refresh people's memories, this was in early 2015,
Right.
the photograph of that very dress that Diane is referencing went viral around the globe. And the reason was is that um, viewers looking at this photograph were seeing it in one of two ways. They were seeing the dress as white and gold, or they were seeing the dress as black and blue. And it was terrifying, quite frankly, to many people to comprehend the fact that their very perception of this dress was different than someone else's perception of this dress for reasons that were not immediately explainable. Um, and so, what was amazing about it, and this is why it would be good to learn more about the science if you're interested in it, is that it really the differences there truly come down to the level of visual perception happening in the brain. In that, if you see that dress as one set of colors, it is virtually impossible for you to see it the other way. And so it was very shocking and very scary. And I was really interested in it because the very kind of like frantic and charged conversation that overtook the globe for a couple of days around that dress reminded me in ways of conversations about race and racism and racial dynamics in mixed company that I've had throughout my life. And in fact, I had just come from a, a session on the intersection of race and writing at my graduate school, so a session that I was uh, helping to lead. And I thought it was going to be just this very benign discussion about indicating race in a character and how you do that subtly or not subtly. Like, it was just a simple craft class, but it very quickly got contentious and very charged and very scary. And a lot of people of color in the room were uh, seeing what was happening in one way, whereas I think a lot of the white students in the room were seeing it in a really different way. And I think one reason why it was really scary for everyone involved was kind of the same reason why that dress was scary, because someone across the room is saying I see this way, and someone else would be like, I literally don't even know what you're talking about. Like, I cannot understand what you're saying right now. I do not see what you're seeing at all. And so I feel that happens a lot. I've since been in many such conversations where things have gone that way. I think that very much characterizes the way uncomfortable conversations about race and racism can happen in this country. And so I'm interested in writing fiction that I was interested in writing fiction that almost can be like that dress,
Huh.
and be something that a person can see one way or see another way depending on the racial experience that they bring to the table. So, for example, I like wrote a couple stories where I tried to um, layer in a couple big conflicts into the story, but I don't want to get too technical, but I also kind of like cloaked them. Yeah, like you sort of, it's like planting two bombs in a short story. But I planted them such that if you bring one kind of like racial lens to the table, if you've lived like say a relatively privileged experience, you're going to see one bomb. You're going to say, well, this is obviously the conflict in the story. This is what the story's about. This is why the characters are all mad, etc. Um, but if you've lived a different kind of uh, ex- experience, and to my mind, a less privileged life racially, then you're going to see the other conflict. You're going to say that's the primary thing, that's the bomb, that's what the story is about. And I developed some techniques that I think worked pretty well, and I really tried to write a couple stories in that vein. And um and I could tell that it was working when I would bring these stories to a workshop of fellow writers, and the discussion that they were having about the story was mirroring the discussion happening in the story. Like it was, in other words, it started to feel like the white and gold versus black and blue conversation. I was like, oh, I can see that they're seeing this differently. And that's exactly what I wanted. And I didn't want the story to ever show its hand, really. And I wanted it to like walk that line. So that's why the dress is really interesting to me. I really care, as is probably clear, about how we read and write, with the racial lens that we can't help but bring to a situation. I myself am biracial. I'm half Chinese and half white. And so I feel like I have this bifurcated life at times, and I can see how the sort of Asian Americans in my life might see something, and I can see how the white people in my life can see something. And it's, what's really interesting to me is where they don't mix, where they really are seeing things differently. And I try to bring those tools into my art. So that's where the dress as a metaphor kind of comes into being.
Do people ever, are people besides you ever able to see both sides?
Yes, once it's pointed out to them, I think. They tend to definitely, there are people who only see it one way or the other. There are people who I do think see both, but they clearly lean on one side or the other. Like, oh, I can see that the story is also about that, but it's still primarily about this other thing, and then what's been interesting is in discussions to kind of point out the sort of both sideness of it, and have people go, oh, to the extent that that's interesting to them. I don't know. I think it's interesting. Um, but
So
yeah.
that sounds like a learning process. You're bringing a learning
Yeah.
process.
And that was my goal. I wanted it to be something that isn't just a piece that you read and then put away. I wanted it to be one that you read with another person or a group of people, and you discuss and you discover in that discussion how you're seeing things differently, which is exactly how the dress inadvertently ended up functioning. Is we ended up having this really rich global discussion about visual perception. We actually had like a worldwide science lesson for a few days about how this phenomenon could work. And I think sometimes what's needed in conversations about race in America, which are so quickly so fraught and so uncomfortable for everyone, and it's so hard to get past that discomfort because it's just retching. It's horrible. Um, but I think to have a piece that can spark some curiosity about why is it that you see it differently than I do, that I'm fascinated. How could that be? Having that more curious conversation, interested and excited conversation when applied to topics like race and racism, I think my hope is that could at least move the needle for someone some tiny bit. I have no idea if it does, but I that was my goal.
So is that why you became a writer?
Not initially. I've always loved writing. I've always loved books. I often say that writers aren't people who sought out to write from an early age. They're just people who never stopped writing from an early age. Because I think a lot of little children like to write little stories and make up poems, and the same way lots little children love to paint, and they love to we encourage them, like that's such a part of daily life as a little kid. And I think it's almost cruel that there comes a point in a child's upbringing where the world decides that that's not of value anymore, or it's not as valuable. And then by the time you get to be an adult, the world makes it downright hard to keep doing that. It makes it downright hard to keep being a painter, a musician, or a writer, and you have to keep fighting for it. And so writers are the ones who just didn't stop. They just said like, I'm still doing it, but it's no different than when I was 6 years old. It's the same thing. And so that describes myself. And yeah, I wrote little poems and so on when I was a kid. I think a lot of writers did. And now, I guess I take my writing more seriously, but I hope I still have fun with it. I mean, there can come a moment if you take your work too seriously, you want to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. And one line I have taped over my desk is have fun at all costs. Like it can be really easy when you start thinking about your career with a capital C, and there's your strategy for getting this project out or whatever. It can easily stop being fun, and then your art will start to die. And art and art making is very different than career, to my mind. So have fun at all costs is a mantra for me.
That's very important. It really is. So you have a book in the American Short Stories book. Let's see. I have the title wrong. Here we go. The Best American Short Stories.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a very interesting story. Is that one of the ones you were using to help people see the different sides of race?
Yeah, a little bit. It uses some of the same techniques that I used in the stories that sort of modeled after the dress, but um, it's it's about a Chinese American second generation woman who is very, very, I think, like she's very obtuse in certain ways and very smart on other ways, especially when it comes to race. And she has just had this horrible breakup, and she's out dating again. And I went through something similar in my life. I went through this big breakup. I went out dating again, and I had this like weird feeling when I was first going out on these dates that like it didn't matter if Brad Pitt was like my next date. It didn't matter, sadly, if like the perfect person for me was my first date out of this relationship. I knew that none of these first people I was going out with were going to be the person I ended up with. It was like this uncomfortable feeling, and it's because I knew like I wasn't ready for like the next person I meet to be my husband or whatever. And so I knew like I was on this journey, and but it put other people in an uncomfortable position
Right.
that they were like these going to be these like interim people. And there's a lot of stories about, you know, a lot of wonderful love stories, a lot of stories about people who come together in unexpected ways, people who are meant for each other. There's a lot of stories about spectacular divorces and really awful breakups. There's not very many stories about those just strange relationships that don't work out, you know, and they're short lived, you know, they're
Yeah.
short lived. They're they're meaningful in some ways, and they're not meant to be. And I think a lot of people have a lot of those, and we don't spend a lot of time concentrating on them. But I was really interested in focusing a story around that, where I knew, like, and even this main character knew she's not going to end up with this person who she meets at the outset of the story and dates for a little while.
Yeah.
Um, but that relationship is nonetheless going to be meaningful to her in a very important way for the rest of her life. And she's going to be important to her in ways that I think she can't even fully articulate, but that I hope the reader can see and can understand. So so that's the story I wrote. It was the first story I wrote that I like, it was painful to write, you know, for all sorts of reasons. And, you know, you hear this artist say this all the time, but I think it's really true when you write from like those places of pain or like real confusion, or just really having no idea what the hell you're doing. It can actually paradoxically produce some of your best work. And when I got the call from Best American Short Stories, it was a total surprise. It blew me away, and it totally confirms that notion that sometimes you really just have to like trust the process, and and let go of your preconceived notion of how this is supposed to be, and just be brave enough to go to the parts that scare you. That's what that story taught me.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sonda. It's been delightful speaking with you and sharing our love for exploring written word and life.
Yes, thank you for this. This has been so lovely, and I appreciate getting to speak with you so much.
Sonya is our September art events author. Register through Eventbrite to join us online Saturday, September 25th at 2 p.m. for her live reading and Q&A. There will be an ASL interpreter throughout the program to both sign her talk and your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.